So hi everyone, I'm Amarachandra. Most of you know my name, but if you find it hard to remember, Amara is a good shortcut and it sounds a bit like camera. Yeah, it's good to have these reminders. And we're doing a series on the path to enlightenment, steps towards enlightenment. And I am doing, well, this is week 3, and I am doing talk 2. Because last week I was supposed to give this talk, but I had COVID. So our city stepped in. So we had talk 3, which was ethics in week 2. So we're going back to talk 2. So the first talk was on the idea of the path as a kind of series of irregular steps, what it's like, what the path is like, what our practice is like when it's a bit irregular, where you try a bit of this, you do a bit of that, you get completely involved with this, and we can sort of scatter our energies away. So maybe, you know, get very interested in Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, and read up a lot about Tibetan Buddhism, but then it's or feels a bit too Tibetan or something, perhaps. So then it's like, no, I need to get down into the basics of simple early Buddhist practice. So then maybe I'll go and do a retreat with the sort of Thai forest group and get back into practicing like that and practice very sort of steadily like that. But then I kind of perhaps miss the color. Well, maybe Zen is my path. So maybe get into Zen and then something else and something else. And then actually maybe it's not Buddhism at all. Maybe I'll try this other thing because I've been listening to these talks or following this podcast, or I really like so-and-so. And it's a bit all over the shop, isn't it? It sort of doesn't lead to depth, and it can lead to perhaps it can lead to a bit of confusion, actually. Sometimes it can lead to confusion within yourself about what the hell you're up to. But it can also lead to a sense of confusion about, well, what does Buddhism say? Because the different schools, the different traditions, coming at different times, coming in different historical contexts, sometimes they contradict each other. Or sometimes it seems, you know, it's very, very hard to map them onto each other. I think I've got something about Buddhism, but then I hear from a different tradition, it's like this. I think, oh, how does that map with what my own understanding of Buddhism is? So, so when we're sort of following that path, it can sort of be a bit confusing and a bit difficult to grasp what Buddhism is. So I guess then it can sort of lead to sort of sense of, oh, look, just go and take a break. I'm just going to do X, you know, take a break. I'm not, this spiritual sort of path doesn't really work for me, or, you know, sort of toss it away for a while. And then, of course, something might draw you back to exploring meditation, exploring Buddhism. And in the first week, it was really interesting, actually, in the group that I was with for the sort of the groups after tea break. There were 3 people in the group that I was in who'd come along to Triratna many moons ago. And they'd been involved for quite some time, but then something shifted in their life, whatever it was. And they'd sort of stopped being engaged with Buddhism, practicing different sorts of things, or just sort of letting go of a sort of practice, a Buddhist practice at all. And now they were finding their way back. So it was really interesting to have that experience in the group. Oh yeah, here are 3 people who have had that experience of sort of letting go of practice, letting go of sort of that sort of search for meaning in a way. And we're now back going, actually, I really miss it. I need this in my life. How can I pick it up again? Yeah. Yeah, and even in my life, I sort of feel like I've had a sort of maybe one, you know, you might sort of think, oh yeah, I've had a path of regular steps. I've been pretty engaged pretty regularly, but I've definitely gone off in that direction, and meditation practice has sort of gone off the boil for years, or sort of trying different things, or not sort of practicing very sort of fully at all. And it was definitely part of my wish when I came to work at the Buddhist Centre, was to get back to a path of something that was more regular, something that an environment, a context that could really, really support my practice and support me to sort of be a bit more consistent and regular. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the path of irregular steps. And this sort of path of these three different sort of steps, the path of regular steps, irregular steps, and the path of no steps, it comes from a Chinese teacher from the 6th century. I'm going to, anyhow, Zhe or Jie. Someone out there will correct me. And he saw this. He sort of saw that, you know, people have this path of sort of bit sort of scattergun, or sometimes I think of it a bit like a river that sort of meanders very, very widely, and you might sort of come back to yourself. And sort of when you're sort of following a path of something that's a bit more regular, but also the path of no steps. And I think most of us hope for this path of no steps, because there's this sense of, oh, it just happens spontaneously. And you do read about these people, even today. You know, there are teachers and people who've had remarkable insights, kind of seemingly spontaneously. And well, you know, that sounds great. Won't that happen to me? That sounds like a really good way to get around this whole path thing at all. Can't I just become spontaneously more wise and more kind, definitely more wise? You would all listen to me. I would know what to do with my life. That would be really great. I think if I'm honest with myself, underneath, I'm still kind of looking for that sort of that jump that might mean, oh yeah, I've got it. I don't think that's going to be my path, but it is out there, this idea of these people who sort of have some sort of remarkable breakthrough, remarkable spiritual insight. And then they work it out, I guess, after that. They sort of have a sort of retrospective sort of putting it all together. Yeah, yeah. And when Kula Priya was giving this talk, he was particularly pulling out a quote from Goethe that was the finest achievement for people of thought. So Goethe was a philosopher, so he was into the people of thought. The finest achievement for people of thought is to have fathomed the fathomable. So to have really understood something sort of that can be understood on that level. But then the next part is to then what you can know, you know, but then to quietly revere the unfathomable. We should use a different word, or the translator. So what can't be understood just rationally, to there's a sort of opening up there, isn't there? There's to sort of quietly revere, to sort of be aware of what can't be got at just through the thinking mind. And then there's a sort of sense of reverence or awe even for what is not just to be grasped by the thinking mind. So we need to be engaging both parts of ourselves, really, the logical thinking part of ourselves, and then something else that can open up to something that can't be just grasped through concepts, something that's more mysterious, and something that goes beyond concepts. We get these glimpses, I think, in our practice, but maybe we don't take them seriously enough. Maybe we'll come back to that. I think these paintings sort of point to a bit of that, actually, point to a bit of sort of windows through sort of perhaps chaos or what seems like randomness. There can be sort of glimpses through into something, through the disorder, glimpses of order, or something that can be something that's a bit extraordinary. So how do we begin to understand Buddhism? And what we do think we understand, do we really understand it? That's the next part, isn't it? So rather than just a superficial sense of what I might understand about Buddhism, does it affect my life? Do I put it into practice? And can I see it as something worthwhile to influence my life and that I can live from? So yeah, what is it that we understand about Buddhism, and does it affect our lives? Do we put it into practice and live from it? I think this is the question. I think with the path of regular steps, I think we kind of need to know that, don't we? We need to know need to know that. So that's a question to ponder. Otherwise, our sort of practice of Buddhism can be a bit superficial, or it can be a bit rote learned, or we can just follow what everyone else is doing. And I think for the path to really be true, it needs to be both informed by what's happening for me in my life, what do I need, and informed by the Buddha's Dharma, informed by the whole tradition, by the tradition of Buddhism, the wisdom that's sort of come down through the ages. So it's the sort of intersection of those two things. So that then the path of what we're calling regular steps becomes not just another change of direction, but something that's really unfolding, that is meaningful and affecting and real to us, something that is coming from our own experience, and that we're then really treading the path. It's because it's a path that is our path, not just the path that sort of is in a book. Need to go from here to here, or I can see other people practice this. Now, what do I need to do? And I'm jumping ahead, but I think sometimes this question is easier for beginners than for experienced people. Sometimes when you're more experienced, it's hard to step backwards or step into what my experience really is and know what the next step would be. I sort of can think, I can think, God, I've been practicing Buddhism for all these years. Surely I should be more further along. So-and-so's talking about X in their meditation, talking about breaking through to a sort of an experience of no self. Or I had a wonderful conversation with a group of friends a while back. I didn't participate. I was just listening because they were talking. One of them was talking about, said, oh yes, I find it really easy in meditation to go from the sphere of infinite space to the sphere of infinite consciousness. But I find it hard to just get to the sphere of infinite consciousness on its own. And my other friend was saying, yes, he says, I find the same thing. But I just had to keep quiet because I can't really say anything much about either of those spheres. Yeah, it's great. It's like, oh, should I be doing that? It's like, well, I'm not there. I'm not there. So I just have to be where I am and be with my meditation practice that is, counting to 10, trying to sort of stay with the object of meditation, making it to the cushion. That is also really important. This is where I'm at. So yeah, so sometimes it's harder, even for more experienced people to start, to sort of know where to start. What's the next thing to be doing on the path? Sometimes for beginners, perhaps it can be a little easier. Might say something about that in a minute. Yeah, so there's also understanding the nature of the Buddhist path. And what is the nature of the Buddhist path? We've got terminology for it, but what does it really mean? So sometimes we can, I guess everybody's heard of Nirvana, and Jacob and I were just talking about old favorite bands, so not that one. So Nirvana, what is Nirvana? Well, so let's go back. So the opposite of Nirvana is samsara. There's a perfume called samsara. It's not, as a Buddhist, it's not where you don't want to be perfumed by samsara. I'm perfumed by samsara enough. But what is samsara? What is it to be a bit stuck, really? Samsara is an experience of kind of stuckness or limitedness, being a bit of a slave or a bit trapped by habit and pattern, responding to the world with a kind of reactivity rather than more creatively. So reactive is to just be a creature of habit, really. And perhaps not to sort of know yourself very well, so that you haven't got sort of more resources to draw on. So samsara is about something being a bit on autopilot, something sort of trapped in a kind of pattern of sort of cyclic habit, and without much sort of sense of being able to get out of these habits and patterns. And if you have ever tried to change habits and patterns, and I'm sure we all have, sometimes it can really feel that you're really, really trapped. And it's good to sort of touch in on those moments, to sort of really think about, oh, what is it like to have a habit that you can't change? And it might not just be my dynamic, it might be like a family dynamic, or a kind of more of a bigger dynamic where you're in something that you just really don't know how to change. Well, that's samsara. You're sort of a bit limited and going round the same things again and again. Whereas nirvana, the idea of sort of is a sense of openness and freedom. You've got some way to have a creative response to those habits and patterns, those conditions that build up. There's a bit more love in there. Well, if it's nirvana, actually, there's a lot more. But there's love in there. There's concern for yourself and for other beings. There's wisdom. There's perspective to sort of know how to approach difficulties with a sort of sense of creativity, even playfulness. Some of our greatest tragedies, actually personal ones, they aren't such huge tragedies, are they? You can sort of bring a sort of sense of lightness and playfulness. And of course, there's a lot of energy in there. There's a sort of freeing up of energy once those habits and cycles of resistance, and push and pull, once that's all sort of been sort of resolved somehow, there's sort of a lot of energy and creativity to be spontaneously appropriate in whatever you're doing in the world. I mean, that sounds great to me, actually, to be able to respond to people, to situations with love, with creativity, and with a sort of sense of a bigger perspective. And a Buddhist perspective on our world. But I think as well, we can have this big gap with our sense of, well, that's the perfect life. That's where I'm trying to head. And anything short of that, we can really dismiss our efforts on the path to get, when we're sort of putting our measuring ourselves against quite a high sort of ideal of enlightenment. I should be full of metta all the time, and I shouldn't lose my temper, and I could be kinder. Well, I could be kinder, but there's also a sense of appreciation. So that's where the path is important. The path is this sort of this sense of our lives lived between where we are now and these ideals that we have, you know, where we want to be, what we want to open up to, how we see a human life could be, full of kindness, full of understanding and appropriate behavior, ethical behavior as well. So the path is really important, and sometimes we're judging ourselves against the finished product, when actually we could be a bit more sensitive and aware of where we've already come and what our practice is now. So I'm just going to sort of throw that in. I guess I definitely noticed that in myself. Yeah. And so the path that we explore, that we're going to explore in this series, is a very simple threefold path. So we had our Siddhi last week talking about ethics. Well, maybe it's great to have ethics in there in the second week. We can always be practicing ethics, can't we? But ethics as skillful action. I think of ethics as our relationships, my relationship with myself. Am I acting to my in line with my own highest values? And my relationships with everyone else and everything else? And am I clean and clear with my actions in my relationships? So that's yeah, that's the first part, the path of skillful action. And then the second part is a refining of our energies through meditation. So working on ourselves in meditation. It's subtle, isn't it? Meditation is subtle, and it's how we get to know ourselves. But it also opens up into something which we can't really imagine before meditation. It sort of takes us into levels of consciousness, higher levels of consciousness that we didn't really know we're sort of, you know, human beings were capable of. So it shifts perspective, and it sort of starts to bring in that sort of sense of the third part of the path, which is wisdom, a sort of a deeper understanding of how things really are. So the next 2 weeks we'll be looking at meditation, and then at Buddhist wisdom. Then we'll be bringing it together. Yeah, so the path of regular steps is these 3 great stages of our relationships, our ethics, how we are in the world. And then when that can be, when I can not be wrestling with my relationship to myself, my relationship to the world, there's a kind of way that I can relax into meditation. Meditative realms can sort of open up because I'm not beset and sort of confused or even tangled up in some of, you know, ways that I've acted that play on my conscience, play on my thoughts. And then, of course, then from there, something can open up, which can be sort of wisdom. And Buddhism gives us a great image for this path. We can have the path that's sort of, it's a linear image, isn't it? But we can also have an image of the lotus. And this is an image that comes down to us all through Buddhism, but Sangharakshita, who is the founder of the Triratna Buddhist order. So you're in a Triratna Buddhist Centre. You may know that, or you may not. Sangharakshita also seemed to really love this image of the lotus, and he's handed it down to us. So the lotus, I mean, the lotus, its roots are deep in the mud at the bottom of the lake. And I think this is a really interesting image, because all plants have their roots in something, but sometimes the soil is really fertile and nutritious. But the mud at the bottom of the lake is slimy, isn't it? And it's got sort of detritus and whatever else sitting on the bottom. It doesn't feel very promising. It's not a lot of oxygen down there, for instance, or whatever. But anyhow, so the roots are deep in the sort of the mud. Sometimes it's said in the mud of samsara. And that is me. My roots are deep in the mud of this world, in the mud of my habits, in the mud of the mind that I have, my limitations of kindness and friendliness, the limitations of my understanding. So the roots sort of deep in this sort of slimy mud. But the lotus grows up through the water. So not just straight into the sort of oxygen and atmosphere. There's a sort of, what does that represent? It sort of comes from the depths somewhere, this lotus sort of growing through the water, through maybe the sort of the unconscious levels of our being that need to become more conscious, or the depths of our being that need to be transformed. But it sort of grows up, and sometimes the lotus sort of opens up in the water. Sometimes, though, the lotus sort of breaks the water as a bud, and eventually the lotus sort of grows out of the water, beyond the water, and sort of opens up into the light, and sort of stands proud of the water. So the lotus has come through something and is no longer in the water. In that sort of medium, it's sort of an image, a great sort of image of transcendence, really, a sort of like true flowering beyond the conditions that it was, that it sort of grew out of, I guess, into the sort of the light and the warmth of the sun and of the sort of oxygen and atmosphere. So it's a really beautiful image, the lotus. And, sometimes perhaps we feel like we're sort of putting one foot in front of the other as a sort of path, something that we're developing. And sometimes the path is more about this sort of openness. Sometimes it's be more lotus. See, what do you need to do? Maybe I just need to sort of open up here and sort of see what happens next. So it's a great image for the path as well, the lotus. But the only caveat with that is that the lotus is a kind of a natural image. So it sort of naturally grows up. Whereas actually for us, we need to bring a sort of conscious awareness to our development. We can't just rely on sort of human nature. Human nature is a bit unreliable. It'll get us so far, but not all the way. So sometimes also the image of a house or building a house, you start with the foundations and then you build the walls and the fireplaces, and you don't start to try and build the roof before you've got everything else that have built. So that's another sort of image, that's sort of more of a regular steps image. Yeah. So then, yeah, so where am I on this path, and where are we on this path? And I think it's a really important question, because then from there we sort of work out what we need to do next. What do I need? What do I need? Yeah, so we practice what we need. What is our next step? What corresponds to the level that I'm at? Probably, you don't take up really obscure tantric practices at the beginning of your meditation life. You might do, but it might not get you anywhere. It might be interesting, who knows? But would the wisdom come through? So here we teach the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana as our two main meditations. And then, an ethics ethics is always emphasized in Triratna, isn't it? We've got these sort of this sort of meditation and ethics. It's a sort of real path for us. And then as we sort of become more experienced, then there are other practices that open up. So, for instance, we know the 5 precepts here, but when we're ordained, we take on 10 precepts. So we take on 4 speech precepts and 3 precepts to do with our minds. But we don't try and do that at the beginning. It's the place to start is with the 5 precepts. They are tricky enough. They are a challenge enough. But once you know the 5 precepts, and once your sort of practice is a bit deeper there, you can start to sort of open up, all right, what are the 4 speech precepts? You know, and so then that's enough to practice. And then within that, we might take on our own personal precepts. I might have a precept around speech or around, you know, something that I'm sort of going a bit deeper with in my ethical practice. Yeah. So we start with mindfulness, and we start with positive emotion, because what we need to do at the beginning is a lot of integration. We talk on the journey and the guide course about the royal road. Mindfulness is the royal road to integration, and I really, really love that. All of us, order members, long-standing, and newbies, we all need to practice more mindfulness, more presentness, more awareness of what's going on in the present moment. That practice continues all the way through. Some practices continue all the way through. Yeah, so we start with what we need at the beginning: more awareness, positive emotion. You know, sometimes a lot of us are beset by really sort of terrible feelings about ourselves, perhaps guilt or shame, or a low self-esteem, or just not knowing, you know, how do you get on in this world sometimes? So we need to build up a sort of sense of positivity about ourselves. And then the other part is a positivity about the world, because the world that we live in at the moment, especially in the last few years, it's always been like this. But it feels very like we're on the edge of a precipice. Maybe it has really always felt like that, but we also need to generate that sort of sense of positivity, and with the world that we live in, and feel hope and kindness, and like we've got some agency for building a better world. So we start with that, and we start with ethics. That's our foundation level, and it's really, really important foundation for everything else, really. And you never get away from those foundations. Having more mindfulness, more positivity, metta, not just sort of a sort of superficial sense of positivity, more sort of real loving kindness for the world. There's no end to that. Those practices go on and on and on. Yeah, and our relationships with ourselves and the world also go on and on and on. So to go deeper with this path, to sort of have a correction to this sort of meanderingness, to sort of have a sense of how can I sort of walk more of a path of regular steps. It requires a sort of sense of commitment. So we need to make a commitment to our spiritual path, actually, to ourselves, and to practicing the Buddha Dharma. Traditionally, in Buddhism, many of you know, we do this through saying the refuges. To the Buddha for refuge I go. To the Dharma for refuge I go. To the Sangha for refuge I go. The Buddha in this sense, it's the ideal of enlightenment, you know, that we can all gain enlightenment in this lifetime. We can all gain insight. We can all get insight into the nature of the Buddhist vision, really. So we can all, that's the Buddha, so that's the ideal of enlightenment. And the Dharma, I guess that is the path that we tread. What do we need to do? What practices do I know? What do I need to put into place? So studying Buddhism, knowing what the Buddhist path is, and then more importantly, living that out. It's more important to take a few practices and practice them really, really deeply, really, really thoroughly, than to know a lot and put very little into practice. So that sense of commitment, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to practice this really thoroughly. And those things do change. But I think in a lot of our lives, we have themes that we follow up in our lives anyway, don't we? So then we get to know what our own personal things are and how I'm going to practice. What's my leading edge? What's my inspiration? What draws me on? What's inspiring? And then sometimes your friends point out where you might also need to bring other parts of yourself along. So it's not only just what might be inspiring to me. I might need to sort of gather bits of myself along that I sort of haven't been so aware of. So that's the Buddha, that's the Dharma. And then we go for refuge to the Sangha. So so, you know, in Buddhism, there wasn't just the Buddha. So many other people have gained enlightenment over the centuries. And I mean, that's why I'm a Buddhist, actually. You know, I don't, you know, it's like I want to know it's achievable. I want to know that this is really, really possible. And it is really, really possible. So that idea of the Sangha, of these enlightened beings, means that I feel confidence to tread the path, because so many people have done it over, you know, huge geographical distances, over time, circumstance, class, gender, everything else. It really, really is possible. So yeah, commitment is very, very important to take yourself seriously in a way, to take practice really seriously, and put energy into it. Have an ideal, and then feel that, you know, can feel the gap between those two things, between where I am and what the ideal is. Yeah. And in Triratna, we have these different ways that we express our commitment and our engagement. So some of us are ordained. So if we've got a caseron like this and a Sanskrit name, it means that we've been through a process of training for ordination and changing ourselves, really, understanding more and more what Buddhism says and putting that into practice. And it's only when other people witness that we're effectively practicing that we're ready for ordination. So it's not as if you do 6 years of training and you can get a caser. Actually, you might be 20 years, you might be 5 years. It's when you there's a sort of sense of, oh yeah, this practice of Buddhism is right at the heart of your being, and there's a momentum and a stream there, and now you're sort of ready for ordination. So that's those of us who have the caseron, who are ordained. Other people here are training for ordination, and then another level of commitment is to become a mitra. So a mitra, you say, I'm a Buddhist. I'm a Buddhist, and so that would be the formula to the, you know, I'm going for refuge to the Buddha, to the Dharma, and to the Sangha, to the best of my ability. And the way that you do that, of course, is by practicing the precepts. That's how you that's how you go for refuge, is you do something about it. So you practice the precepts, and you think, to become a mitra, you also sort of say, I'm going to put my colours with Triratna for the while. I'm going to go deeper with the Triratna Buddhist community for a while and see see how that sort of takes me deeper. So yeah, that's part of becoming a mitra, is sort of saying, I'm going to sort of study and be with this community and sort of go deeper this way. Doesn't mean that has to be this, that, you know, you don't have to sort of stick to that forever if you're a mitra. And of course, you could be coming along as a friend, as a friend, and sort of be coming along really regularly and participating in the community and engaged. So we've got these different ways to sort of deepen commitment and deepen involvement within the Triratna Buddhist community. Yeah. Yeah. So running over as usual. So I think we've got this idea of the path as a symbol. The path is not a fixed thing out there. I hope I've been able to convey that. It's something that is, it's your path. What's your path? It's informed by the whole tradition of Buddhism. It's informed by the people, you know, discussions with people, but there's not a path that's out there. It's the path that we live. It's the path that we tread ourselves. And in that way, there's a huge variety of how that's expressed. There's no one way to do something. There's as many sort of versions of the path as we are here. And in a way, then, sometimes from a bigger perspective, we are all on the same path, but it's not, on another perspective, it's not all identical. Yeah. So I hope I've given a bit of a sense of this path of regular steps of starting where we are and moving to what's appropriate for us. What's our next step? And letting that be informed by the Buddhist tradition. What's, you know, and what's where we're at in our sort of own level of practice. Yeah, great. So we'll break now for tea. We'll have that, but maybe we could have a sense of how our path, you know, maybe there's a sense of how our path has unfolded so far. But maybe there's also a sense of what might you need to do next? You know, what might you need to do next? Yeah, and maybe just this idea, just this path of regular steps, the idea of commitment. How does that resonate with you? So yeah, so there's some things to think about.